Well, for those of you who've never run into me before at another conference, my name is Dave Stokes. I am a community manager for MySQL. If you have a MySQL certification from several years ago, you might have my name on your certificate. About 20 years ago, I was working for the American Heart Association. I needed a database, I needed a templating engine, and through luck I fell into PHP and MySQL at the same time. If you ever need to get a hold of me, david.stokes@oracle.com. Twitter handle's @Stoker. Now if you go through the old tweets from about 2 years ago, there's a Nicole Kidman movie called Stoker. So if you go back and see a lot of things about red hair and nudity, it's not me this time. Slides are up slideshare.net/DavidMStokes, or just ping me later. I can get a hold of it. Gotta warn you, this original presentation 8 months ago was 56 slides. And then in the past couple months they've added a couple other things I found better ways to do stuff, so it went up to about 65 slides. Last week we announced our new XDev API, and I had to add another 25 slides. I added some stuff up. So if you go out and download the slide deck from there, here, this is at the end too, and I can give you copies. If you go out and you read the slide deck, it's 86 slides. This presentation is a little bit shorter just because I know that there's actually other presentations after me. So, MySQL 5.7 came out last October. A lot of neat features, security, better performance, secure by default install. But the biggest thing that people have been excited about is the native JSON data type. So before we had a varchar or a real or an integer or a blob, suddenly you have a column where you can throw in a document. Now, for those of you who've been under a rock for a little while, JSON is JavaScript open notation, designed to be human readable. It's a little better readable than XML. It's fairly intuitive to look at, but it's not this JSON. For those of you who are a little older, you might recognize this movie. When I was a little kid, it was very frightening. A little bit later, I started wondering how could skeletons actually wield a sword if they had no muscles? But if you're into old science fiction, this is one of the classics of Ray Harryhausen. It is worth a cup of cocoa on a warm, wet afternoon on a weekend to watch if it's ever on Turner Classic Movies or something like that. But this is not the JSON we're talking about. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking basically about key value pairs. Key value. Now the value can be a string, it can be a number, it can be an array. If you ever read the two sets of standards for JSON, they're both fairly short, both fairly easy to read, and they both have a lot of open things left in the protocol in their description. So JSON's pretty wide ranging. So, how does this all work? Well, my mom used to say there's always a way to skin a cat. Problem is, how many skinless cats do you want running around your property? Old days, before 5.7, create a table with a data character, with a character set string, and you could shove JSON in there. Worked. The only trouble is you had to somehow get the data out of that string, and it wasn't easy. For the most part, you ended up doing regex. For those of you who've never played with regex, it's nasty. For those of you who've played with regex, you know it's nasty. The worst thing about regex is you write something that works beautifully this week, and you look at it next week, and you're going, what the hell was I thinking? What was I taking? How the hell does it work? So, MySQL 5.7 came out with a new way, a data type to store JSON documents. Well, it has to be a valid JSON document. It means that the parentheses have to be matching all that stuff. We take it and we optimize it. We put it in a binary format. If you've gone to a couple of Postgres talks, they talk about their JSON-B format, very similar to that. We take it, we organize it in binary, and we do some sorting. And we make it easier for this server to go out and pull hooks. Remember, you're taking what used to be a big thing, a document, and put it into a column, which used to be a small thing, and a table, which used to be a fairly small thing. So, limits. First, it's the first thing that usually PHP programmers ask me. How much stuff can I actually shove in that column? Well, it's going to be about a gigabyte. It depends on your maxed allowed packet file system variable, but figure you're going to be able to shove a gigabyte into a column in a table. So, how do you use it? Well, create a table, carefully here called T1, And we say we're going to have a column named JDoc that's of type JSON. And we insert in there key 1, value 1, key 2, value 2. And you'd expect to get key 1, value 1, key 2, value 2. Fairly simple. That is the meat of the discussion as far as the JSON data type. Now comes the little fine print on the bottom of the screen when they show you that you can get your car for $99 a month. Efficiency. If you really need to get that last little bit of efficiency, you're not really worried about ease of use, the JSON data type is going to take roughly about 5% more than just storing it as a character. Not a bad trade-off these days. Also, we tend to normalize the data. Notice here that we're inputting key 1, value 1, key 2, ABC, key 1, value DEF. So we have 2 key 1s. Notice when you select it out, you get 1 key 1, value 1, key 2 is ABC, and the second one gets dropped. We do that as part of our normalization process. If that's a side effect for you, throw it into a character field. So we take all that stuff, we sort it. Also, as we're sorting it, we're not guaranteeing that if you pull it straight back out, it's going to be in that same order. So if you need idempotence, use JSON's first, or Postgres' first JSON data type. Searching. This is where it starts getting kind of hard. You actually will probably want to work through the manual with that. What we're going to do is we're going to extract from this JSON string here the value of name. We use the $sign to reference this string here. So it is like the this operator in PHP and many other programming languages. And we're saying we want the name from this string. And we run that and it pulls out that string. Path syntax. This is something I cut out of the big, that's in the bigger slide deck, not in this one. You can actually get down to every piece of the JSON document. It's a little cumbersome, but that's part of the JSON process. They really didn't give us a clean, easy way to get down there. So, here we have a string. If we're breaking down the string, $0 evaluates the first element, $1 evaluates to this, $2 evaluates to this, and if you're asking for $3, you're going to get a null. Now, if you don't know what a null is, come back to my talk at 12:30, and I'll go through all the details on that, including why your DBAs go gray and get shouty and all that other stuff. And because $1 and $2 are non-scalars, you can actually dig deeper. $1.a, which is $1.a, is going to evaluate to that. So you can dig down to every item you need to get to. Also, we decided to give you a shortcut because JSON_extract is much more to type than just column, arrow, path. We're also going to have some other shortcuts being announced fairly soon. You have all the standard comparisons that you can do. We don't have between and greatest or least right now on the way. You can also cast this information coming back from JSON as whatever you need. In this case, you have something you're pulling out that's an ID number and you're casting as an unassigned number. So you can put it in easily, you can pull it out in whatever format you want. Works fairly well. Now, since you are basically breaking the first rule of data normalization, putting a whole bunch of stuff in one column and not normalizing your data, we've had to come up with a whole bunch of functions to be able to help you do the normal stuff like create, search, update, get metadata, and all that. So you can see this is kind of an extensive list, and in the bigger slide deck I go into depth on most of these. So we have functions that help you create, functions that help you search, functions that help you modify, and then return value attributes, the metadata, the links, the depths, the types. And it's actually a valid JSON document before we try to shove it in there. Remember the shortcut, the arrow operator? So here we're going to update a table. We're going to set a value n equals 1 where the ID number is equal to 4. Fairly straightforward. We spent a long time trying to make this as readable as possible. If you have any complaints or gripes, let me know. I can take it to engineers. Now, playing with this, the first thing that most folks run into is the set, insert, and replace commands seem very, very similar, and they are. Set replaces existing values and adds non-existing values. Inserts values without replacing existing values. And remember that funny normalization thing I said, the first one stays. In this case, that's the first one on the insert. And replaces only existing values. So if you're trying to replace something that isn't there, you're going to get a warning or an error. Got all that, right? Simple? So when I pass out the test, you're all going to get 100% on it? Okay. I mainly deal with the PHP community, and if you're not a PHP programmer, I'm sorry. If you are a Java developer or some other similar language, Python, JavaScript, Node.js, you'll soon be able to see the similarities. PHP has 4 native JSON functions. That's all it's had for a long time. That's all it's needed, and they work fairly well. Here's an example from the manual. Have an array, A1, B2, C3, etc., etc. Encode it into JSON, and you get a valid JSON document. With that, you can just insert into your table, wrap it with single quotes, and away you go. So if most programming languages have something similar, it's very easy to take your data, turn it into a JSON object or JSON array, and shove it into the database. Here's a second example. We're actually selecting and getting JSON data. As those of you who've been doing MySQL programming for a while, this should look very, very, very familiar. Now here's one where we have the values, but we don't have the programming language formatting it for us. We actually have MySQL use the function JSON array or JSON object and wrap the stuff correctly for you. So there's a shortcut that way if you don't want to do it through your programming language. Or here's a case where you have it out in the database and you want to pull it out in JSON format and feed it to your program. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we broke the first law of data normalization by putting a big thing into a column, which is supposed to be a little thing. Why generated columns? Well, there's a lot of interesting uses for generated columns. The big trouble is you can't really index the JSON data by itself. It's not a format that MySQL servers easily recognize and format. So what we're going to do is we're going to take let me do a little more on generated columns first. Here's a table, prevalently called T1. Field 1 is an integer. We have something called GC, which is an integer. And we're going to define that as whatever this value is plus 1. And we're going to store it, and we're going to have an index on it. Now the difference between stored and virtual is stored as it materializes a column with that value in there. It actually creates a column in your table for you with that value. The virtual column, which is the second type we have, doesn't actually generate that value until it's on the fly, so it's not actually stored in the table. For the JSON data type, you have to use the stored values. So you need it materialized. So, let me go back to this one. So whenever we input 1 into here, GC is going to have the value 2, 2, 3, 100, 101. Fairly simple functionality. Now, here's what we're using with JSON tables. We're having a table, and we have a column that's named C that has JSON data in it. And then we have another one called G, which is an integer value. And what we do is we extract out the ID number from the C field and put it into G, and then we're going to index it. Now you do MySQL searches on that data without having to do a full table scan. For those of you who aren't DBAs, full table scan means you have to read the entire book from the upper left-hand corner of the first page to the lower right-hand corner of the last page because you're not quite sure where your data is or if it repeats, so you have to read everything. Index, you go right to the record or records you want. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be materialized in your database, in your table. So you can actually go out and use this column for other stuff other than the JSON. Once again, we have the lovely shorthand that you can use to help you write stuff. Here's a benefit, especially for a student, in case you have to do a case-insensitive search for an assignment. You're not one of his students, are you?
No.
Okay. I'm not giving away a homework assignment. One of the banes of my existence used to be in the past. Someone would look for O'Hara. Big O, apostrophe, big or small h. You never knew. So you had to do a whole bunch of stuff to get the search to work. With this case, with this version, the original column that you're going to index is probably a case-sensitive column. Now you create a new column that's case-insensitive, and you can do a search on that. So you can actually find what you need. So if you have a demarco or something in there and you don't know what the capitalization is, you need to find it quickly, you can do that. Wonderful blog on this at this website. Now the syntax for generating columns is fairly simple. You have a column name, the data type as you're used to when you're DDL, generated, and then as for the expression. You say where it's stored or not. You can actually make it unique, and you can also make it a primary key. Now, got to warn you, virtual columns are not stored but are evaluated. Once again, they're only generated when you read it. And the default, unfortunately, is virtual for right now. Subquery parameters for stored functions, other defined functions are not permitted. Auto increment attribute cannot be used in the generated column definition. Now, a column you're using can be auto incremented, but not in the definition of it by itself. So, that was, believe it or not, the majority of my presentation. That normally would take me, instead of 17 minutes, probably take me about 40 minutes because I went through all the functions and details before last Tuesday. Well, what happened last Tuesday? Well, we dropped MySQL 5.7.12. What to do? Well, we have a new protocol. We have a new shell. We're trying to get people to use MySQL in new and creative ways. It's kind of interesting. If you've been paying attention to the database wars the past couple of years, a lot of people would say, well, we've got to throw everything, no SQL. We don't want to actually have schemas for our data. We just want to throw it in there and use it. Peter Zaitsev of Percona will tell you that's like his son throwing everything in the middle of his room and not actually cleaning up and saying, but Dad, I know where everything is. Doesn't scale and it's kind of messy. Doesn't work with a lot of business logic. But big demand for that. Well, since we've had the JSON data type, now they call them hybrid or polyglot databases where you have no SQL and SQL. We started having a lot of requests for people to be able to store stuff in a document store. They don't really care, it's a database at the far end, they just want to be able to pop open data. So we came up with a new plugin. What we're doing is, MySQL traditionally has been on a 2-year release cycle for the server. Big trouble is every 2 years, that's a big ship to push down the gantry and float. So what we're trying to do is get a lot of the things like group commit, where you write to one master and it creates a group of masters. The X protocol, all that sort of stuff is a plugin. So it's not tied to the server release. By the way, the next release won't be MySQL 5.8, it's going to be MySQL 8. I'll go into the details of that later. And once we pull a lot of these things out of the main server, it makes it easier to run the server because we have customers telling us we want more, faster, better, sooner. So this new API is rather impressive. Now, in the past, like I said, if you're storing JSON stuff, you're putting it in a character string, messy to use. 5.7 comes along, a little easier to use. But very, very few people are actually teaching SQL anymore. I go to programming conferences and I ask the developers to raise their hands. Roughly 2 to 3% of that, any formal training in SQL. And then they wonder why their queries stink. And they have no idea about set theory or using something like a Venn diagram to draw a join. It's kind of frustrating, but we have to adapt. So what came out? Well, we have a new shell. It works like the old shell, but there's a SQL mode, there's a Java mode, or a JavaScript mode, and a Python mode. We also have new connectors. Connector J for Java, a connector for Node.js, that's all our own brand new, very exciting, and a new one for .NET. Other connectors are on the way. So, you have to have some definitions. We're going away from talking about databases, we're talking about collections now. CRUD operations, this is create, read, update, delete. For those of you who went through the the horrors of the Ruby on Rails debacles, you're used to that. Our new plugin is just that. Very simple to add to the server if you're running 5.7.12. And it supports the new protocol. A new protocol lets you do all the normal stuff you want to do. You can encrypt it end-to-end. You can do just CRUD, or you can do CRUD and SQL. It's very, very interesting. And it's going to have an entire messaging layer, which is going to be important because as people add more and more servers and things distribute, maybe the server you're talking to is going down for maintenance. And you'll get a message, hey, I'm going down for maintenance, talk to one of these other servers. Hopefully that will be showing up soon. So the new shell, creatively, is called MySQL shell. So rather than just typing MySQL carriage strength command line, you're now going to type MySQL shell, return. And I'm doing a simple connection, MySQL minus U, which you're used to for the standard CLI, and the name, and it creates a new session at the host wherever you're going to, and notice the port's gone from 3306 to 33060. So the new protocol has a new port number, which is something else you're going to have to tell the system admins to poke a hole in the firewall for. And it pops up in JavaScript mode. There's a SQL mode, there's a Python mode. More modes coming. So once you're there, depending on what you're doing, you can add documents, add collections, find, modify, remove. Standard CRUD. Here's an example. In JavaScript mode, I want to talk to the schema world_x. I connect, it tells me who I'm talking to. I can create a collection. Collection is the new term for a table. It then lets me get information on that, and I can drop it. Or, before dropping, I can go in and put in information. Now, you're probably not going to type it this way. You're probably going to do a cut and paste, or you're going to have it all as a single monolithic string rather than all the character terms. Standard CRUD. Now, what you're doing here in a shell, you'll also be able to do in the programming language and embed it. Your programmers no longer need to know SQL. You no longer have to worry about them doing bad SQL syntax and killing your servers to keep trying stuff. It's not a panacea. They can still do n+1 problems and all that, but it's there. Here's an example. db.countryinfo find _ID equals AUS. Boom. This is a format any JavaScript programmer would be happy to get the information and parse and run with. Now, if you're an old timer like me, the first thing you ask is, okay, how do I qualify this? Where's the where clause? Well, it gets a little, from my mind being an old SQL dinosaur, it's a little crazy. You can do a find with everything shoved into one argument, or you can chain these together. Find GNP greater than 5 million, .fields GNP and name to actually pull up the fields that you want. Nothing too radical. Here's the last example, I promise. Here's a thing where you're modifying. You give the ID number, and you're going to set the demographics column. You're going to change the life expectancy to 78 and the population to 28. Boom. Okay. Just because you can do something does not always mean you should do something. Write that down. You're going to be asked that on a piece of homework in a philosophy class. So, JSON's great. Is it a panacea? No. It's great if you need to store JSON formatted information, like from an API, or that's your corporate standard. You are breaking the first rule of data normalization, which means it doesn't work with a lot of SQL stuff, which means you're going to be retrofitting. If you start using JSON, there's a lot of your old stuff you might have to be retrofitting this new technology. It doesn't always go easily. A lot of time the thought process that you came up with that was perfect 2 years ago, when you go to retrofit something, does not go easily into the new stuff. So, if you are using JSON, please go this way. If not, please use standard SQL and make a lot of people happy. It's easier on you, and there's a lot more people that can read that. Once again, that's my contact information. Now, normally I throw these out for people who ask questions. You got a question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, go for it.
So we're using a product called Jing Factory, which is a web services layer. It has a MySQL driver. So that's going to be up to them to upgrade their driver to accommodate your JSON data type for 5.7.
They don't need to change the driver, it's just another data type. It's like a real or a int or a car. So the driver shouldn't have to change it all.
One question I have. Is it storage engine agnostic?
I recommend using InnoDB,
Yeah.
mainly because MySQL is a kludge of 60s technology with a 70s implementation. So if you're going to do it and you want it crash safe and you want it,
Right.
all that, use InnoDB.
Okay.
So.
I didn't really understand the collections. How does that fit in with the tables?
Well, the trouble is you get a little bit further down your programming path, you'll find that every system has a cluster.
Okay.
And the cluster has a slightly different meaning. Every programming language has a different meaning for the word object. MySQL kind of blurred the line between schema and database, and a lot of the purists in the Oracle world screamed. In the document storage world, they don't use the word schema. They have a collection. Now, there might be a schema underneath, but they don't want to call it that. They want to call it a collection. So just think of it as a table.
Okay.
So. Yeah, the other gentleman back here with lots of database experience, it's kind of, you find that they reuse terms when they shouldn't. By the way, Oracle is hiring. If you're a MySQLer, 90% chance you'll probably be working from home if you want to. We're looking for everything right now. Oracle's doing a big transition into the cloud. So if you're a cloud person, we also have big openings there. If there's any other questions about MySQL, Oracle, if you want to see demonstrations, whatever, let me know. I'll be around most of the day. I have another talk at 12:30 on the care and feeding of a MySQL database for busy Linux admins, because most Linux admins are told, oh, you're also doing the database. We were going to have you clean the parking lot, but we figured the database would be a little bit nastier. So if there's anything else you want to hear or know or see, let me know. You're a quiet group even for a Sunday morning. Yes, sir.
One question I had was, what actually is the underlying storage layer? I mean, or I guess the underlying storage format that's being used for the JSON object. I mean, you mentioned that it's, I mean, is it just a linked list of cars or ints?
It's actually turned into a binary hash at the lowest level.
Interesting.
So
cool.
Makes it easier to manipulate in order that way. So
that's what we've been doing already. So that's perfect.
Yeah. So no other questions? No? No? Yes, sir.
I heard Oracle's doing some work with Skype or something like
that. I only get to headquarters 2 or 3 times a year, and it's kind of a surreal experience. I have no idea what would be going on with that. Since Skype got taken over by Microsoft, and I transitioned from the team I used to be on, and we moved over to Slack, I haven't really been using Skype. Oracle is 150, well, nearly 150,000 employees all over the world, and there's always someone doing something with somebody. So, cool. Well, thank you all very much. If you want some stickers, I have some up here. If you need another dolphin for the second kid at home, wink, wink, let me know. And other than that, thank you all for coming out, and I hope you have a great show.